Hi, and welcome to everyone who's joining us this evening. I'm Beth Ann Sinelli, the Executive Director of Communities That Care Greater Downingtown, and we're very excited that you're able to join us this evening for our final parent speaker program for this school year. This is something that we've been sharing since the beginning of the school year with the Downingtown Area School District and also with our community prevention partners. So we're very happy that for the next hour and a half that you're going to be joining us for an awesome program. And we're super excited that tonight's program is partnered with Be a Part of the Conversation. And the title is Healthy Boundaries, Healthy Families. And we have an amazing panel this evening and presentation. So I'm going to ask Kim Porter, who is the director of Be a Part of the Conversation, to introduce this evening's program and also the speakers. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you, Beth Ann. Thanks, everybody, for being here. We're very excited to have you with us. Can somebody give me a thumbs up if you're seeing the title screen? Great. Thanks so much. All right. So our program, as Beth Ann said, is Healthy Boundaries. Oops, Healthy Families. Sorry, I just lost my screen. There we go. There we are. Good heavens. All right. Thank you so much to the Communities That Care of Greater Downingtown. We have representation tonight from Beth Ann Sinelli and from Chrissy Jimbowski. Also, thank you to the Downingtown Area School District and to our funders for this program, the Department of Drugs and Alcohol at Chester County. So thank you, everybody, for all the support and the beautiful turnout that we have this evening. Great to have all of you with us. Please go ahead and submit questions that come up for you through the program. You're going to be hearing from a few different speakers initially, but we really, really want to hear from you. We are recording this, but your questions will not be recorded. They will not be seen by the other participants unless you put something in the Q&A that you want to be public. But we'll be checking those and moderating that throughout the evening. And thank you to those who submitted questions in advance. We've got some great questions, and we're going to hope to get to as many of those as we can. You can follow up on tonight's program by visiting our website, and I'll share some of these links in the chat, but that would be conversation.zone/parents. So the recording will be there along with some other supportive information. But I'm really glad you're here live because we want to have conversation. So please do engage with us later with any questions or comments that you have. At the end of this program, you'll see a survey pop up. Even if you've been with us before, please take a moment to complete that survey. It helps us tremendously to hear from you, to know what was helpful or not, also what you might like to hear in the future. Just a word about what our organization provides. We do community events like this throughout the year. Some of them are on Zoom, some are in person. We have a calendar I'll mention in a moment and a few programs coming up that I'll tell you about. We also have parent partnership meetings, which take place throughout the region either on Zoom or in person. There are 18 meetings every week, 5 days a week, 52 weeks of the year. But those are amazing. They're really supportive for those of us like myself. I'm also here with my colleague, Judy Hirsch, and the two of us are doing this work because we each have a son who's in recovery today from a substance use disorder. And that's what brought us into this work. But we really need each other to kind of get through it especially on the tough days. I still go every week. I love it. I love my peeps. We also have something called the Family Recovery Course. This is for parents or guardians or grandparents who identify that their child has a substance use disorder. This is not a prevention program. It's an educational program for those who are definitely going through some challenging times with their child, whether their child has sought treatment or not. But it's a very educational. It's capped at 12 participants. It's a 3-part course, fully funded by Chester County and some other counties. So there's no charge to attend those as well. Coming up, we have a couple of programs I just want to mention to you that are open to anyone. They are on Zoom, which makes it really easy to join. We have one where we're going to be talking about alcohol and underage drinking. Is this a rite of passage for our young people? We'll kind of explore that on April 4th. We have a topic that is so relevant right now. This is consuming a whole lot of our time and energy these days. Cannabis, it is complicated, folks, especially when we're talking about young people. So we'll be talking about cannabis on Wink Wink 420. If anybody gets the reference there, we figured let's just go for it. It's April 20th. That's when we're going to do our program. And this is kind of nationally known as Cannabis Day, unfortunately, but we're going to lean into it and talk about cannabis and kids that day. We also have an in-person program. This is also funded by Chester County Department of Drug and Alcohol Services. This is where we will be at Chester County Hospital on Tuesday, April 18th. This is for family members, again, looking for some support, knowing that your child is struggling or other family member has an issue with substance use. And we're going to be joined that evening by Lisa Silk, who's another terrific clinician. And you can find more about our upcoming programs on our calendar. We also have a YouTube channel that has lots of content that is recorded there. And I hope that Chrissy and Beth Ann tell you about the resources that you have, such an amazing amount of resources through their podcasts and the support groups and all of that. Lots out there. There's the parent partnership I mentioned with all of these meetings. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I just want to remind you that it is available for you. So I am now going to turn it over to Lex Remillard, who is our therapist with us this evening. Lex is with the Therapeutic Alliance. And Lex, I'm going to leave it to you to tell folks more about yourself, but I'm really grateful to you for being here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kim. I'm grateful for you. Hey, everybody. My name is Lex Remillard, and I've been a therapist now, I think, for 16 years in this area. It's been amazing. And I have worked in many different areas, specifically with addiction and substance use disorder, but also with mental health and a lot of family work. And in doing that, a lot of boundaries, which I think is the name of the game tonight. And I have a couple different ideas on how, like, what we're going to talk about. I want this to be important for you and for you to gain something. So any questions that come up while I'm talking or any of the other presenters, please ask questions. So with boundaries, with all the different kinds of people that I've treated and met with and tried to assist, one of the key things with boundaries, when parents are trying to set boundaries with children or other loved ones, the idea is we can set a boundary with someone else, but what are the boundaries we have with ourselves? And that's kind of the first point I would like to talk about tonight, which is to model the behaviors you want to see. We actually have to embody the boundaries that we have to live them. The parents do. And what does that look like? Well, first and foremost, modeling behaviors tends to go a lot further in reinforcing behaviors in children than what you say. So the first question I have for you, ask yourself this, if you're being honest: what is your relationship with alcohol? What is your relationship with cannabis or any mind-altering chemical? You do not have to have a substance use disorder for it to be for it to affect children. This is very important. Modeling, just having alcohol in the home statistically increases the likelihood of your child drinking. We don't know how they're going to react to it. Some of us, myself included, come from families that have substance use disorder and mental illness in the family. And it's important to be honest, right? To be honest about, and again, these things are age and developmentally dependent. So I'm speaking very generally right now. There's a conversation you want to have with a 5-year-old that's going to be a lot different than a 17-year-old, right? I think we understand that, but it's important to talk about. So we want to model the behaviors that we want to see. Another thing is how do you react to your child? I'm a parent and I've reacted not in the best way with fear, which showed up as anger. It did not go well, and it never goes well. So becoming rather dispassionate. I'm an extremely passionate person and I present pretty well, but at home, when it's someone that I love, I have to really think about how I am emotionally. Because when I get excited about something or I love someone, it can get pretty intense. And being dispassionate doesn't mean to be disconnected from the situation, but it means to kind of put your emotions to the side and talk about the principles of what's going on, which in a heated time can be very difficult. So one technique is if you feel like emotionally overwhelmed, say, hey, guess what? I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. I'm going to take a little walk. I'm going to be back in 2 minutes, and then we're going to continue talking. So yelling or anger, or on the other side of the pendulum, being devoid of emotion. Some people grow up in extremely volatile homes, and a survival technique is to go inside yourself. So one of the main components of how to be a better parent is to look inside yourself. What kind of work have you done on yourself? Have you been to therapy? I don't think everybody needs therapy, but I think everyone would benefit from it. You know? Do you know the kind of family system that you came from? Are you aware of the different parenting styles that you experienced? Because not everyone, but many people have two parents, and they both came from different families, usually with different parenting styles. So we're the recipients of those things, and it can be quite confusing because no two people are alike, and there's a lot of differences in the way people parent. So look inside. If you have any trauma in your life, many people do. It's important to understand how that shows up in your life emotionally. And why is this important? Because when we're trying to set boundaries with our children, it's easy for these things, or natural for them, to come in and make it confusing, or make it an automatic response that we're not aware that what we're doing is creating a bigger problem in the future. Okay. And when in doubt with any of these ideas that we're talking about today, it's important to go to principles. Honesty. Honesty is the most important thing. The clients I have make fun of me because I talk about it all the time, but it's that important. Honesty, integrity. Your word means something. If you say it, you have to own it. And if you can't do it, take accountability for it. This is modeling. Reciprocity. Being able to give and receive. Okay. The second idea is allowing space for failure. I think many of us in our society understand, maybe emotionally, that failure is something to be rejected and something to work against. There's a high level of perfectionism, meaning I have to go over this thing and I have to do it right. It serves us well in many parts of our society, but in parenting and in your home and emotionally, it becomes negative. It can be very negative. So the idea of moving away from perfectionism, and I kind of link perfectionism with a type of rigidity, emotional rigidity, like it's either right or it's completely wrong. And it's a didactic thing, like black and white, good and bad. And we want to move away from that, because the way that I see failure is that it's a teacher. We have to kind of look at failure in a new light. Failure is the gift of learning. Perfectionism destroys the ability to learn new things. And the idea behind this is also to be curious. I can't tell you how many times in my life thus far I've been blown away by trying something new, and it kind of going against my belief system, and then it opening up a whole new area of learning for me. And I've seen that a lot with my clients. When talking to children, or to, children in this case, it's good to ask open-ended questions, particularly around meaning. like I've had the hardest time with the TikTok situation. And I've had to say to my daughter, what does this mean to you? Like, why? Just explain it to me so I can understand where you're coming from. And then she kind of lights up. She's like, well, this is the meaning of it. And then why is it relevant to you? I saw in the chat, someone asked, will there be any tools shared for nonstop TikTok and YouTube? That's a good question. The question is truly not about TikTok or YouTube, but on the rules of the home. Where's the meaning, and what are the rules behind? And Mike Blanche does a great job on this. What are the rules behind electronic devices? What are the values that you have in your home? In the adolescent time and in childhood, the values should be on self-care, nutrition, exercise, enlightenment through education or through art or creativity, and education and giving. And TikTok and YouTube can be means for that, but there has to be limitations. So the question is, what are the limitations of the kid's responsibilities versus the reward system of whatever they want to do? And that has to be very clear, or things can get confusing. And this goes back, the next thing is be aware, patient, and empathetic. Which is really a question about how do we as parents regulate our emotion? Some people are very quick to anger. Some people are very quick to sarcasm. Sarcasm is kind of just a form of passive aggression, which is just aggression. So we want to try to get down to honesty. And if we find ourselves in a place where we cannot be emotionally regulated, the easiest thing you can do is explain it. I'm having a really hard time today because my friend is sick and I'm very frustrated, and I'm getting really frustrated with you. So I'm just going to take a break. I want to be different, but I can't do it right now. I'll be right back. You can take a little walk, or whatever technique you can learn. These are important things. They're all very subtle, but this is the modeling behavior that we're talking about, because they actually show our children how to communicate their feelings. And the next thing is just providing structure, support, and encouragement. I can't tell you how many of the people that I treat, all they need is someone to believe in them and to give them encouragement to try something new. That's it. I always say, like, I cannot do this for you, nor will I, and no one can, but you can. And I'd rather that you fail a million times and just keep trying, because you're going to learn either this isn't for me, or you're going to succeed in the way that you see fit, and it's going to give your life meaning. I was talking about this today with some of my clients, and I'll end with this. There was a practitioner named Winnicott. He was a British psychoanalyst and a pediatrician. And he put forth this theory in 1952, which was good enough parenting. And the idea behind good enough parenting is that, and this is a child development idea, but just hear me out. When a child is born, the mother and the father need to be directly attuned with the child's needs, because they're helpless. And as time goes on, there needs to be a small amount of time where the child learns to be frustrated, and then their needs are met. And as they develop along the curve, the area of frustration needs to increase as their development increases. That's the idea with good enough parenting, because what you're building in there is resiliency and appropriate attachment. If we try and do everything for someone else, they can't do anything for themselves. And then on the opposite end, if they're neglected, they get learned helplessness, which also creates problems, extreme problems. So this middle ground, which is easier said than done, is what we're aiming for. Good enough parenting. Do the children have their emotional needs met? Do they know that they're loved? Are they getting the basics of what they need? 6 hours of TikTok doesn't meet the requirement. And if they get upset with you, it's okay. Some of the clients that I have, they have a really hard time when their child is upset with them. And the biggest thing is we can't have our emotional needs met by our children. And if that's what's going on with you, it's okay. But please go talk to someone about it and get it straightened out with yourself so you can have a new experience with your parenting. Okay. I think that's all I have. I could talk, but I'm going to stop because Sarah's coming up and Sarah's awesome. Thank you very much.
I mean, I feel like if there was a way to replay or repeat that last little vignette, and I certainly will lean on my colleagues in terms of Chrissy and Beth Ann to jump in anywhere they would like to, because knowing both of them pretty well, I imagine there are many things that you said that probably Chrissy is also having like light bulb moments on. I know. I don't know why I would say that. I have no idea why I would say that. There are so many elements that you shared and in such a succinct fashion. I give you so much credit for doing that. I won't pretend to be quite that poignant or that eloquent, but what I will say is, you know, from the school setting, I think my experience in working in Downingtown prior to sort of my current role, which is more administrative, but in previous years working with more direct adolescents and so forth, and a lot of times students who were really struggling with significant mental health or substance abuse issues. You know, what we saw on the school side of the conversation was a lot of times parents who, to be truthful, maybe there had been some challenges. By the time I kind of got to know kids or families, a lot of times the boundaries really had not been well established earlier. And so then you end up in these really kind of challenging power dynamics and power struggles, for lack of a better term. And, you know, some of my experience, and Lex, you've probably had kids like this too, working with adolescents who are trying to find their limits, because I'm personally a big believer in the fact that kids do actually need limits. And when we haven't really set the stage for that or explained what our limits are or what our expectations are, then when the road gets hard, it's really hard for them to find their way. And then I think, to your point, commenting on sort of some of those parental emotions that start to play out, you know, I've certainly had plenty of conversations with parents who are really struggling to kind of get insight into what's going on with their kid. And a lot of it is also either a lack of communication at home or a lack of transparency. And we've talked, I think, at length through some of the other parenting sessions that we've done. And Chrissy and Beth Ann and I have certainly talked about this a lot, you know, being able to just have open conversations with your kids, and starting those early and starting those frequently. And the comments you made that resonated, I made a note to myself when you were just talking about taking the break. If the moment isn't right, or what your child is sharing with you, you can't hear it, or you're not in the emotional place to receive it. You know, I think somebody coined the phrase of like, wait, which is why am I talking? Person's laughing. Like, we have to take those moments as adults. And I think sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves to have all of the answers and to know how to fix it. I think we talk a lot about that in several of our parenting sessions, wanting to fix things for our kids. Sometimes these are things that we just need to be present for and be available and listen and try and be non-judgmental and just be open. I know it's easier said than done. But I think that's a lot of times what I've experienced in terms of working in particular with adolescents in the school, is sometimes this challenge, and what starts to emerge, especially for some, not all, but some, is, you know, maybe kids aren't attending school, and that's now become a problem. Maybe kids aren't motivated in their learning or really interested in their education, and that's become a problem. Maybe kids are spending way too much time on technology, and all of a sudden there's not really a structure or routine in place to help kids to go to bed on a regular time and get up in the morning. We see that a ton. And all of those, in my opinion, kind of start with some of those conversations that you alluded to in the home. And also, to your point, I think you started out by saying, we have to kind of know what our position on that stuff is too. Like, what are we doing and what are we showing our kids in terms of our routines and when we go to bed and when we get up, and what healthy coping strategies do we use to sort of moderate our emotions? So, but Chrissy, anything you want to add?
I was just going to say, and I know we want to share resources and stuff, and I don't know if we want to do dialogue and stuff first, Kim, like if that would make more sense. But Lex, you're so intense and just dropping like all of these like mic drop phrases as you're going through. But something that's really interesting that I just noticed as you were talking is everything that you were saying wasn't like, if your kid is doing this, do this. If everything your place that you were coming from is, look at yourself. Look
That's
at yourself and we can't have our emotional needs met by our children. Like, I'm going to come back to that in a second.
Yeah, I don't know why that came out of my mouth, but it did.
It was brilliant.
It's brilliant.
I didn't make it up.
But the thing is, it's interesting that you're like, look towards yourself first, because I think a lot of it has to do with, and someone in one of our podcasts that we did said, what kids see is what they'll be. So a lot of it really has to do with, okay, what are you role modeling? What's your emotional, baseline and status? How are you taking care of yourself? Like, and how that really can, as parents, set the tone for your home, set the tone for your kids. And, I can even speak to this personally. Like, I think I interact very differently with my kids now from going and working on myself and working with a therapist. And like you said, not everybody needs it, but most people would probably benefit from it. Because I think also I made a point to change certain things, and in a positive way, where I'm role modeling certain things that are valuable to me and my partner, and like, you know what I mean, to us.
Yeah.
So it's not literally, we do talk about it, but we don't have to talk about it all the time, because if you're doing it, your kids will see it, and they just, that's more impactful than anything else, I think, is kind of what your point is. So I think it's very interesting where you're coming from is like, pay attention to yourself first before you do anything else. But can you expand upon just that phrase of like, we can't have our emotional needs met with our children, like from our kids? Like, what does that look like? And can you just give an example of that in real life? Is that weird to ask?
No, you can ask me anything.
Could you give like an example of like the meaning behind that? Because I think that will help understand that phrase, because it also is one of those things you can kind of sit and reflect on.
Okay, let me think about this. So we can't get our emotional needs met by our children.
And I think you were relating it to like how it's very difficult for us sometimes to deal with. And we talked about this today, actually, at one of our peer support groups that I was at, was like, it's very hard when our kids are upset, because it's the same as like, nobody wants to hear a baby crying. Nobody wants to see your kid upset and be crying and things. And how maybe that's something that you were meaning is like saying like, okay, well, how can we stay calm in that moment and not be, triggered by that, or us, they're all ramped up, so then we get all ramped up to mirror it. Like, is that what you were meaning by that?
Well, I think what I meant is, first of all, what are my emotional needs? Like, first of all, what are they, and where are they lacking? And how do I understand that? Am I conscious of that? A lot of the things that we're talking about are not faults or things that people have failed at. It's truly consciousness. I have had so many biases in my life, things that were just occurring around me that I could not see or experience emotionally. And then I woke up one day and I'm like, oh boy, this has been bad and I need to change over and over. I can't really do that on my own. I need to have a process that helps me see the mental blank spots or emotional blank spots in my life, so I actually know what my emotional needs are or where they're lacking, and work on that. That's my responsibility for my life. And then I bring the change into the relationships in my life, parenting, loved ones, friends. In my work, I have to do my own work or I'm going to screw up a bunch of people to don't want to do. So I have to do this. It's a responsibility. If you're a parent, it is also a responsibility because we're raising like the next generation of people here. So I think it's really just about getting aware. And the issue that I've seen, and this has to do with cognitive biases, is that the people that think they have the most biases are more likely to work on them, and the people who just don't think they have them aren't going to work on them. They're only truly uncovered by accident in a therapeutic setting. Sometimes they occur relationally, but you have to be a certain kind of person to hear critical feedback without flipping out and being okay enough. I know many times in my life, I have not been okay enough to hear feedback, but I needed to get okay with it so I could grow. So this is the difficult part. And that's why this is a little different. It's like, look inside. A good question to that is, what if I don't want to look inside? I've also experienced that. It's necessary and it's a responsibility. How am I going to raise a child if I don't know how to do that? And it's okay if you don't know how to do that, or if you haven't experienced a lot of it. You can start any day you want. And you do not have to be perfect at it. Making a start is a huge deal. Making a step in that direction is a huge deal. Making a subtle change in your life will have incredible reverberations positively to your child. Also, the quality of the relationship, I didn't mention this, but the quality of the relationship between you and your loved one, the parent or the surrogate parent, or if it's a divorce situation, the quality of the relationship between the divorced parents. I've seen examples where the divorced parents, it was rather rancorous when they got divorced. They figured it out and they could be rather neutral with each other. That benefited the child all the way. I've also seen extreme rancor cause huge problems emotionally for the child. So as adults, we have to act as adults. And sometimes it's really hard to, especially if we feel like we've been hurt. So I guess when I'm talking about emotional, we can't get our emotional needs met by our children. The bigger question is, where have I been hurt and have I rectified that with myself? Have I been able to? Because when my child is smart with me and does something, I'm going to react in a way that might be over and above the situation at hand. It'll be emotionally charged with things I don't even know of. I hope that answers your question.
It does. It does.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're
It's
welcome.
a shame, and while I can't tell everybody to go to therapy, but I think
You
a
can
lot of
try.
oh, I know, I probably have at some point. But I mean, really what we're talking about is also just a lot of insight and emotional vocabulary, and having skills that I think sometimes some individuals take for granted. And then in other instances, there are a lot of people who either didn't grow up with that language or didn't grow up with that experience and don't really have that vocabulary or that awareness. And I think that type of obviously work like you described and that growth is really essential for our kids, especially in times of difficulty. Yeah.
The cool thing that I've seen, Sarah, you and I have known each other forever since I moved here in like 2007. Since I've known you, the number of kids that are teenage children and young adults that come into therapy, and I always ask, have you ever done this before? What's your feeling about this? Like, are you doing this for yourself? Are you doing this because you're externally motivated? And many more nowadays are just like, yeah, it's like a thing. It's like destigmatized in a way that I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of kids are like, yeah, my friend goes, like, I thought I'd check it out. And I'm like, this is crazy. So there is like really positive change happening socially in that regard.
No, I would agree with you. I think that the pendulum is shifting in that direction. I mean, we actually did a podcast yesterday a little bit to that point in terms of the momentum and the fact that certain things, especially in this generation, in terms of like asking for help and the awareness around mental health or substance abuse problems or just being in therapy, has been in many ways kind of normalized, to your point, which certainly makes engaging people in treatment a whole lot easier. I will say one of the other things that you touched on, which I really thought about as well, is the fact that, and I always come back to it, you know, there are a lot of really solid clinical guiding principles out there and lots of different type of theoretical approaches. But at the end of the day, at the core, even those that are, let's use the word evidence-based, they're all founded on the relationship. And so like, as you were talking and just speaking to sort of, I think of kids that I've known and kids that I actually continue to know and have known for over a decade at this point. You know, I can't say that there's been anything profound that I've been able to do to necessarily change their life other than to be present and to be supportive and to continuously say, I believe in you and I think you're worth it.
That's it.
And that's really it.
It's a wrap. Yeah. And for
Um,
you to be emotionally consistent and present.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Sarah and Lex, I was just thinking about this. So as always happens to me when we do these programs, with, you know, as I mentioned, having a son at 28 and my daughter soon to be 26, I two things either happen. I either have cringeworthy parenting memories, or I sort of romanticize that I was just a sort of, you know, amazing parent. So somehow I know the truth is like in between there at some point. But I think, Sarah, there's like a million thoughts that have gone through my head with this conversation this evening. But I think that you and Lex hit on one thing, and that is there is like no magic toolbox to this. And I can remember when my kids came in my office one night, it would have been my daughter, and I had this bookshelf, and on it was every parenting book known to mankind. This was before you could Google anything. So there was the book on the oppositional child, the ADHD child. I just had and she took a picture of it and then later on posted it on her Facebook and said, yes, this is my mother. This is like what we grew up with. And so we joke about that. But I think it was that search for the tool, the search for what was going to work best in that moment. How was I going to deal with this? And I'm very grateful there was no Google, because it takes a while to go through those books and get your highlighter out and remember that stuff. So I'm really happy that I didn't have, you know, any other way to get that information. But I think that what it came down to are a few things that we now laugh about as, you know, a parent of adult children. And that is the things that they do remember that I don't remember, and the things that they appreciated that I forgot that made a difference. And it always came back to relationships, communication, you know, being open, even in the uncomfortable moments, you know, not judging, you know, kind of being vulnerable. And then also being able to say, hey, I'm sorry. Like, I just really screwed that up. Like, I lost mine on you. And it's because of this, or I owe you an apology. And I've had both of them come back to me and say to me, you know, as adults, like, hey, I'm like really sorry for some of the things I said and did, like in high school. Whoa, now that I can see it, that was like some really ugly moments. But I'm really grateful that you know, you stuck to, you didn't lose it on me, or you respected where I was at that time. So I guess that was the magic tool, you know, was this relationship building and listening and, you know, and not looking to, as Christy said, fix it, always fix it, but like being in the muddy waters for a while and just like figure it out. Like, I'm not going to fix this for you is probably, you know, like some of those lessons learned about boundaries and dealing with emotions. So hopefully I don't have too many cringeworthy parenting moments that come to my mind after tonight's session. Like, did I screw up my kids? Kind of that thing, you know, but I didn't so far, I don't think.
I think when parents try to fix things for their children, it's extremely well-intentioned. But what it does emotionally in the child is it disempowers them, and they start to believe they're not capable. They might like it, but it does something else.
Mhm.
And so it's very important. That's where like I can't get my emotional needs met from my child, which I have anxiety because they're not doing it right.
Oh, yeah.
And I know how to do it because I've done it a million times. So I'm just going to do it.
Just let me at it.
Trust
let
me,
just
I
do it.
struggle with this every day. This is
Mhm.
like the craziest stuff. Me being a parent is so difficult. I am good at therapy. Parenting, it's been rough, but I'm open to learning. So I've learned a lot just from my daughter is like amazing, but she puts me through the ringer because of me, not because of her.
Yeah.
So I've had to do a lot of soul searching on that, which has really helped.
We
know?
talk about this issue that you just brought up, Beth Ann, with the challenges of not knowing what belongs to me and what belongs to my child in the responsibility world, right? And usually if this is for me, at least when I'm doing something, when my kids are in their 30s, but when they were younger, if I'm doing something for them that they could be doing for themselves, I'm really doing it for me because I feel like I want to fix this and make it better. It's really not, I'm really not helping them. If I thought it through, I would recognize that I wasn't helping them.
Mhm.
But I also wanted to circle back to what Chrissy brought up. I also loved what you said, Lex, about our emotional needs not being the responsibility of our children to me. I feel like my emotional needs are so directly correlated to my boundaries. So for me, if I'm fearful because my child's behavior is changing dramatically, I have fear. So I don't want to poke that bear. I see him in pain. I can't stand to see my kid in pain. And there's always a lot of confusion around rules and boundaries. What's a rule? What's a boundary? So the rule of the house might be no illegal substances, no staying out past this hour, whatever that is. The way I look at the boundary is how I respond to the consequences of that. Are we going to follow through on those consequences? Or am I going to say like, I pick my battles. He's going through a rough time. I'm going to let this one go. Do you know what I'm saying? Like just my boundary now has been compromised because my fear needs to be placated. And if I say like, sorry, bud, I know you're struggling right now, but the deal is you can't vape. It's not okay with us for you to be vaping, whatever that might be. And if I'm worried about their response to me, again, back to what you were saying too, Lex, about not being their pal, their friend. It's like, I'm the parent. This is a hard no. We can talk about it. I'd like to know why you keep going back to this. I'd like to get curious about this and why that this is not okay with us and it's still happening. Who can you talk to? How can we support you? But to me, boundaries are most challenging either when the wheels are coming off, things are really looking bad, or almost the complete opposite when I'm so confident that they're doing all the right things. I don't have to work. Then my boundaries get loose in a different way, I feel like. You know what I mean?
So consistency.
Yes.
Yes. That is tough.
It is tough.
I think one of the other things that came to my mind listening to the conversation and piggybacking or going back to the comments around perfectionism is also the fact that I think we have to be careful to not want certain things more than our kids want them, or to not want things. And I guess what I'm thinking of in my mind, especially again, kind of in the school setting, is obviously we want our kids to be successful. We want them to achieve, but that looks different depending on the student and what their goals are. And I think sometimes that can be a really hard conversation because sometimes maybe our kids aren't performing to their ability, or maybe they're distracted, or maybe they're whatever. But I think it's important for us as adults to sometimes remember, it's kind of, in my mind, I think about it almost like, when you are in therapy, you pay your copay or you pay your payment, because that's like your commitment to the work. Like, it's not just about showing up, but like you have to be committed to the process. And in some ways, I think sometimes we want things for our kids that maybe they're not yet ready to want for themselves. And you can't necessarily create that for them, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense, but
And we have some great
Yep.
questions coming in. So if you don't mind, I think would like to really start bringing folks into the conversation. Thank you for some of these questions. And we will get to the advanced questions as well. But here's one. How can you enforce rules or boundaries without creating a heated situation? Parents can have rules and constraints in place, but be completely unable to enforce them without escalation.
Well, this is a difficult one because we need conflict to have vulnerability and connection. How we do conflict is the question. We need conflict. One thing I learned from my grandmother, she was Italian, when the situation would get heated, her voice would drop and get very quiet and everything would get lower. It's like a technique, old school. So when the situation goes up, if you keep going up with them, it will escalate. But remember, you're in control, theoretically. So you want to just drop it and get quieter.
Mhm.
And more insistent with your language, but not on the emotion. Because if someone's yelling, you can't yell over them. But the idea, sometimes when people are, kids erupt with a lot of anger, it's kind of how we react to it. Are we afraid of it? Did we grow up in a house like that? What's the meaning behind it? Some people know how to do conflict pretty well without yelling. Sometimes it's necessary to yell. These are all specific situations. The question is, when is it appropriate?
And an example of a boundary too might be like, as you said earlier too, Lex, when you're ready to speak to me respectfully, I'll come back in the room.
Yeah.
That's a boundary. I won't be talked to that way. So I'm going to step out now. And when you're ready to talk, I'll be back to talk to you.
I know you have it in you. And if this topic is as important as it seems, you'll be ready to talk soon. I'll be here. Just let me know.
Yeah. Bit of a follow-up there. With social media today, kids get more information online and seem to trust online sources from their parents. How do we improve the level of trust with our kids and teach them the importance of actually coming to their parents first before trusting online sources?
It's a tough one.
And even though, and we know the research tells us that we are the messenger that our kids are listening to the most. The modeling that we do, the behaviors that we do, the things that they hear us say is absolutely crucial to their development, even though they don't act like it and they don't seem to respect what we have to say all the time, but they are listening. So does it even have to be an overt, no, listen to me, this is reality, not what you just read online? Is it something that we can just talk about and have them learn from us to not necessarily trust what we see online, rather than pointing out like you're listening to the wrong source? Maybe to say like, I feel like I've been following this stuff on Facebook a little too much, or whatever resonates for us, that might be relatable for them.
I think the first thing to do in a situation like that creates joining is to ask them, okay, help me understand what you found. Be curious. I'm interested to learn all about whatever you're about to present to me, even if I know it's from dubious sources. Let me have it. I'm all ears. And then the next question would be, what is the meaning of this to you? Why are you building a case where you've gone on Google to present this to me? What do you want? What's going on? Every single person is always trying to get their needs met all the time. So it has something to do with needs being met or not met. Fear of having something or fear of having something taken away. So if you can get below the context and into the principle of the idea, it'll go better. Try to understand. And then, there's been situations where logic doesn't work with a kid because they don't care about logic. They just want their needs met. So sometimes this is just the way it's going to be. I'd like to explain to, but you don't want to hear it. And we're going to have to leave it at that.
Does anyone else have any thoughts about that? About social media and trust and
I guess the piece that came to my mind, and I thought that was a beautiful answer. I think the piece that came to my mind was also just going back to sort of what your values are in your house and within your family. And I think part of the reason why I say that is because probably most people either on here or viewing have at some point heard about some of the TikTok challenges that have sometimes gone viral and gone sideways, you know? And so I'm just thinking of those circumstances. And obviously there are kids who see those and participate, and then there are kids who see those and choose not to, or for whatever reason. And there's a piece of me that kind of comes back to probably a little bit of that values conversation within your home and your family system, in terms of just what have you already kind of talked about or instilled in your kids, so that when they do see certain things on social media, they can be inquisitive, but also formulate some of their own opinions, and also maybe know, like, yeah, this isn't really something that, like, we don't do this. Does that make sense?
Think for yourself.
Right.
And a lot of it has to do with media literacy too. Like looking at these messages, like, okay, but let's see, like, who's the author of this? Who created this? Do you know, like, you know, looking up things, and you just, what is the source that this is coming from? You know, and I know with these various challenges and things that kids do, you know, like you said, Sarah, I agree with you, like the values of, like, so if you participated in this, what do you think might happen? How do you think, you know, does that match with how you want to be perceived, or do you want to deal with the consequences of whatever that is? I know there's like so many of these different challenges and they're all different and stuff, but talking those things through. But yeah, with social media anyway, and I try to talk about this with, you know, I have an elementary school kids, but just looking at, like, well, what's the point of what they're doing? And also, to your point, Lex, I think being curious about it and maybe kind of having the most generous interpretation of where our kids are coming from, right? So, like, you know what I mean? It's, even though, like, we probably think the things that they're watching is just really, like, just, you know what I mean? Like, why are you spending your time consuming this content? However, they may say the same things about the stuff that we're scrolling along and looking at as well. It goes both ways, right? But just being curious about the types of things, like, why is this so important to you? What is this value behind it? I don't know. I'm just echoing the same things that you all said. But
I think it's also validating and important for kids to see us also take interest in the things they're interested in. And even when there are things that we kind of struggle to, like, wrap our minds around, or I didn't grow up with roadblocks. It kind of confuses me, to be honest with you. But if it's something that you love and you get enjoyment out of, then talk to me about why it's so important to you and what you enjoy about it. And let me figure out how to sort of make sense of it. I think all of this.
And then that creates that opportunity for connection, because then it goes back to, like, the relationship and being connected. And then that builds trust. So it's all just like the building blocks, one on top of the other. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, guys. So can you share anything that could help with step parents, to add to that with a high conflict parent on the other side? So the challenge of being a step parent with a not harmonious relationship with the other parent, apparently.
Is implied in this question, I don't know, is implicit in this question that you have more, as a step parent, you have kind of more safety and connection with the kid than their rancorous parent does? That's what it seems like.
That's what it sounds like to me.
Let's just say that's what it is.
Okay. Thank you.
I think the idea would just to be, it's the same principles we're talking about. I mean, you can use these principles with anyone. It doesn't have to be your kid. they are generalizable across all relationships. So in this case, it would be open-minded, be kind, empathic, boundaries, and maybe if you wanted to ask them, you know, this is tough because I don't know the people or the situation, so it's hard to really give an answer that's appropriate.
They said that yes, to confirm your assumption. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. How about be cool? You know, like going back to basics, all people need is someone that believes in them and that's emotionally stable and can show up in their life in any way. That's pretty much what people need at the very basic. Someone that believes in them.
We can only control our part of any conversation, our part of any dynamic, right? As much as we would like to kind of foster a better relationship with others, we can only have so much influence over that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Blended families are challenging for sure. Yeah. And what if your child is a perfectionist and you aren't perfect? How do you gain credibility with everything you do and say that as questions or criticized? Isn't that called being a parent? Not being perfect and being criticized and questioned.
How about being a human?
Yeah, right.
No one is.
Right.
It's an ideal that makes things tricky. I mean, it's a good thing to shoot for in some ways. I guess the first thing would be to ask your child about the idea of perfectionism and what they think that means. And if they embody it, what's your relationship with doing everything the right way? And have a conversation. Again, it's about understanding. With every behavior that is viewed negatively by the outside, there is a payoff for the person's doing it, even if it causes problems in their life. There's always a payoff that's positive for them, even if it's small and short-lived. So one thing I ask people is, what's the payoff for you? Even though everyone's angry at you, what's the payoff? And there sometimes is the key. But no one asks them that. You can ask them that. What do you get out of this? And what makes this hard for you? Because sometimes perfectionism is connected to anxiety and OCD stuff. Sometimes. And sometimes perfectionism is a way of modulating anxiety. And there's other ways to do it. Through physical activity, through artistic activity, through creativity, through building things, whatever. So maybe it's also introducing other options where you can't be perfect, or something that's new, where you have to be terrible at it for a while and kind of learn to be a learner.
There's a follow-up that the perfectionism is an actual diagnosis. So I wonder if you or any of the others, even Sarah or Chrissy or Beth Ann, have any thoughts about perfectionism. I'm sure you're seeing plenty of this with kids.
Don't think it's a clinical diagnosis. Lex, you can correct me
It
if
isn't.
I'm wrong.
No, it's just anxiety.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Anxiety is a diagnosis.
That's a diagnosis. I am thinking though of just some lived experiences, and obviously I don't know these circumstances, but I am thinking of students that I've known who sometimes can be really hard to have certain conversations with, because they're so rigid in their thinking.
Mhm.
And so kind of fixated on certain things. And I do
Mhm.
think for some of those, in some of those instances, it's also a way of kind of keeping distance, if you will. Like if I'm trying to have a conversation with you and I'm asking you to potentially be vulnerable, and that's hard for whatever reason, you can kind of keep me at arm's length by continuing to sort of fall back on some of these rigid mindsets. And to your point, Lex, in terms of like trying new things or trying things that you haven't mastered. I mean, I think about a kid who I knew once who, or her comment every time I saw her was, I failed. I mean, she always failed. And I was always like, can you define fail for me?
Mhm.
And it was always like a B or a C on a test. And I was like, no, I don't think that's failing. Although in her mind, it was failing. And so we kind of got to a point where she kind of had to practice and experience not failure in the sense of earning F's, but I mean, we got to a point in our relationship and in our conversations where when she would start to get a grade that was below what she deemed as appropriate, like we had to push into that and sort of develop some tolerance of that and sort of like create vocabulary around the anxiety, but also be okay with those moments. And it's funny, she's a kid who I actually knew through her college years as well. And it was really cool to see by the time she got to her senior year of college, she was like, yeah, I don't care anymore. And I was like, yes. And I'm not saying that to create a whole lot of anxiety around the idea that we don't want our kids to care about school, because we do. But I was like, that's fantastic. She was like, I'm in college. I have a job. I know what I'm doing next. She's like, I don't care. It doesn't matter anymore. And I was like, welcome to life.
Mhm.
So, but I do think sometimes those can be challenging conversations when kids are really kind of stuck in their thoughts and their perceptions and really kind of fixated on it has to be this way and not that. So I would agree with what Lex was offering in terms of trying to push into either some of the other emotions or trialing maybe some things that they don't have mastery of.
I think sometimes nowadays that I see this more often is that people have an expectation of instantaneous things just because everything seems to be instantaneous, kind of, except our except the relationship stuff. And the question is, their expectation is, I should have had an A. And then my question is, did you work for the A? Did you actually put in work for it? Well, I studied the night before and I should have gotten an A. I'm like, that doesn't even make sense. If you actually want the A, you have to prepare for it and put the work in. And I know you can do that, but you have to actually do something. That's difficult if you want to attain that. So sometimes it's less of an idea about perfectionism and more of a maturity level and a naivete about the amount of work I have to put in to get the thing that I want, and kind of reframing that.
And I'll be honest, I think sometimes we see that, I'll just be honest, I think within the school setting, sometimes we see the transition from like elementary to middle school or middle school to high school where kids have not had to work very hard academically. And then all of a sudden they get faced with maybe coursework that's really challenging or a different approach to learning that they haven't really been exposed to. And then all of a sudden it becomes hard. And it's like, oh, I have to actually work at this now, which in my opinion isn't a bad thing at all. But for some kids, I think that transition can be really challenging at times.
I really appreciate this next question because this comes up a lot. I think that my 16-year-old daughter needs group therapy, but she's opposed to it. You know, like the challenge of convincing that your child to go to therapy in the first place. But it says she has an evaluation that supports the need for the group approach. I don't know the approach for this.
Any clients, and by the way, 90% of the clients that are in group therapy with me or have gotten into it have been completely opposed to it. So what I usually do is I'm like, let's just talk, you and I, let's talk a little bit. And then basically I just like one day I'm like, hey, guess what? You're doing really well with this. You become much more comfortable. We're going to walk across the hall, and I just kind of make it happen. So that's like a technique I use that's like shock and awe, but it usually works, because the second they're in there, it's an expectation issue, and it tends to be very positive. If you don't have that situation, which many people don't, what I always say is it's kind of like trying out a new food. You might not like it, you might have ideas about it, but all I want you to do is try it out one time. This is life. Check it out before you decide how it actually is. Have your own experience, and then we can talk about that. And I think that's fair. Life will be incredible if you can just try some things out one time, see for yourself. So it's the discernment between an idea and a real experience. You want your child to have a real experience and have their own opinion on it. They might not have a really accurate opinion after one experience, but it's kind of the idea that sometimes if someone really needs something, they've just got to do it. That's where, as a parent, you have to understand that. And there's other things that are less like that. But I would suggest if someone is having an emotional problem or a substance use disorder, they absolutely need it, and it shouldn't be debatable, because of the outcomes that come from not dealing with it are much worse.
Well, and we wouldn't debate with our child if they had an abscess that you need to go to see the dentist. You're going, because it's going to get worse if you don't treat it and address it.
Mhm.
And Sarah, it might be an opportunity for you to also to mention student assistance programs and other kinds of
Sure.
support services.
Yeah, I can share some of the resources that are available in the school. I don't think Lex is looking for endorsements, but I will certainly say in the time that I've known him and also some of his colleagues, we've always been fortunate because, to be truthful, I think Lex, as well as some of his colleagues, they're just phenomenal professionals. So I say that because I've known many kids, teenagers, adolescents through the course of my career who are like, I don't need therapy. I don't want to get help. It's your problem. I don't have a problem. And it's funny because I've known plenty of kids who've had the opportunity of sitting in front of either Lex or Mike, and always come back and they're like, "He's great. He's so easy to talk to." So I share that because I do realize for a number of our parents in the community, sometimes it is hard to either get your child to be willing or to be motivated to seek help. And I'm also cognizant of the fact that there are a lot of providers out there, and some who I've had really positive experiences with, and some who I probably have had less positive experiences with, if we're being honest.
Mm-hmm.
So it is challenging. I would say within the school setting, and actually Beth Ann and Chrissy and I sat on a podcast yesterday and talked a little bit about finding the helpers in your schools. And so that dialogue included, obviously, our school counseling resources, but then in addition to that, within our school buildings, my staff are the prevention specialists, which are typically working with students who are struggling with mental health and or substance abuse issues. And so I would say if you have a child in one of our buildings who's really struggling emotionally and you're thinking about counseling resources in the community or trying to find some therapists, they're always a great resource to reach out to. We do try and really stay well informed on what things are available in the community. In addition to that, as Kim mentioned, all of our buildings from Marsh Creek up to our 3 high schools have a SAP program. And so our prevention specialists actually facilitate those meetings. Anybody can refer a student to SAP. It should be for observable behaviors, but it could be anything from dropping grades to school attendance to underlying emotional concerns that we're not really sure what they are, or it could be a substance abuse problem that you would like somebody to sort of look into and get a little bit more information on. And so I think the Downingtown sort of model of SAP is kind of unique because in addition to some of the assessment services that we do offer, we do also offer a lot of what I would describe as informal mentoring, and kind of coming back to that whole notion of having a trusted adult and somebody that you can talk to. For our SAP team members outside of our prevention specialists, Yes, thanks, Kim. SAP is student assistance programs. Obviously, outside of our prevention specialists, most of our SAP team members are, well, they're all SAP trained, but they're not obviously therapists or clinicians, and they would never pretend to be providing therapeutic services if that's really what's warranted. But for a lot of our kids, just having somebody in the building who they can go to and maybe share a little bit about what's going on or ask for help or get some guidance on some things, sometimes that's enough. And sometimes also for some kids, if they're in that place of like, I don't really know if I have a problem, I'm not really sure, that place exists. Sometimes just being able to have open conversations with people and then get feedback in terms of people saying, yeah, that kind of sounds like something maybe you should talk to somebody about, can really be helpful. So again, in regards to referrals to SAP, anybody can make them. The easiest way to do it is probably through your building's prevention specialist. And actually on our district website, all of that information has been updated under people services. So you should be able to access that relatively easily. That's the short version on SAP.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think so many people are not even aware that it exists, and it's such a valuable resource. So thank you.
I would agree with you.
Yes. There's a question about a therapy session with a grandchild, that the grandchild did well and was engaged. And she thought that the grandchild enjoyed her being there. Is it good for grandparents to attend their grandchildren's sessions? I'm sure it totally depends on the circumstances and a lot of variables, but do you have any thoughts about that, Lex?
I would just ask like how old the grandkid is. Because it could be a 28-year-old grandkid, or it could be a 4-year-old. Like, I don't know. That's where it becomes kind of like child development question, which is, I mean, when in doubt, I would ask the kid, what's the benefit of me being here? Sometimes it might seem like it's going better because they view you as a safe adult. If that's the case, and that would be great.
8 years old. We just heard back 8 years old.
But then the flip side of it is you not being there, it would be scarier, and they would be forced to think for themselves maybe a little more. So I can see positivity behind both of them. And maybe doing an alternating thing to see like the different experience.
And would it be helpful for them to talk with the therapist as well, just to see?
Yeah. When
right?
in doubt, just ask.
Yeah.
Ask your grandkid, ask the therapist, communicate, see what happens.
Right. I'm turning to some of the advanced questions that were great. And by the way, folks, feel free to continue to drop your questions. They've been terrific. Love to hear from you. But what are the best practices for making reasonable consequences? I know this is a challenge a lot that parents describe, and how to deal with kids who don't care about the consequences. And I know this comes up a lot where it's like, you know, when the consequence is like they're already kind of isolating, because, you know, this is not this person's situation necessarily, but perhaps like they're already isolating, you're going to ground them. Like that's not necessarily moving the needle anywhere. Right. So what should consequences look like? What are the effective ways to do it? And what if, as this person asked, they don't care?
Well, when someone says, I don't care, that means they cared a lot. Usually with kids, I don't care. It's like, okay, you care too much, but you don't want me to know where. A big debate is usually on the phone, because the phone is the it's the impetus to connection. It's the impetus to nefarious things. It can be so much. But in our society now, it is viewed as a given rather than something that you've earned. So I think usually if someone says, I don't care, and they lose their phone, they all of a sudden care. Just my experience. So the question is, what are the rules behind the responsibilities that you have? Are you doing your responsibilities? And any kind of punishment or reaction to not doing your responsibilities should be fair, but also should be a little uncomfortable. Because that's kind of how it works. The question about this specific thing, I don't know. I don't have enough backstory to actually answer it. But this is the framework that I would think about it in.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Sarah, this is a great question for you. Are the counselors at school available for non-school related issues? For example, 10-year-old who has anger issues at home, might get physical with parents or hit siblings, etc., but no behavior issues in school.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit yesterday. And to be truthful, we do get parents who reach out with similar concerns. I would still encourage you, yes, to reach out to your child's school counselor. Part of the conversation we had yesterday was the reality that for as much time as kids obviously spend at home and with their families, they also spend a significant amount of time at school and with educators. So even if there really isn't an overt behavior or presentation in the school setting, I would at least start with the school counselor and maybe share some of what your concerns are, or what you're experiencing at home. It's quite possible that they may also suggest that you reach out to one of our prevention specialists who might be able to guide you in the direction of maybe some community-based resources or services in the community, just because it sounds like the issues are more outside of school versus in school. But it's always appropriate to reach out. And sometimes the counselor or the prevention specialist might be able to just even offer some insight or some feedback on what sort of they hear or see throughout the course of the school day. I think the other thing, and one of the things I was thinking about as Lex was answering the last question is, sometimes some of the most like challenging situations I can think of are also kids who maybe really have needed help, but also have still been able to maintain a pretty high level of achievement. And like kids who really aren't experiencing maybe some consequences or some failures because they're able to sort of sustain certain things to a degree, but it doesn't mean that other things aren't going on and aren't problematic. But I go there in my mind with regards to this question as well, because I do think it's not lost on me. I think there are a lot of kids who really work hard throughout the course of the school day to hold themselves together and to manage their emotions and to manage their behaviors and to regulate themselves despite a lot of stimulation. And then when they get home, it's like the wheels come off the bus. Lex is like,
Oh yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So I share that because you may not be completely alone in that experience, if that is your experience. And I would absolutely at least start with a school counselor, and then hopefully we can try and provide some guidance on maybe some resources to pursue as a family.
Yep, thank you. The issue is twofold. One is not being able to find the resources in the community, at least any that take insurance. And two, we try natural consequences, but when work isn't done at school, there seem to be no consequences.
Sounds complicated. And I can't tell from that if that means that there are things that are happening at school and maybe you're struggling with the school-based team. I'm not sure. You can certainly send me an email outside of this conversation if that's helpful. I can put my name in the chat, and certainly we can try and follow up, or I can try and provide you with some direction. You're not wrong. I mean, part of our conversation yesterday as well, and Lex knows this too, while we are a community that has a lot of resources, there are also still some logistic challenges, whether it be availability or funding sources, insurance, who takes it, who doesn't. If you're working through medical assistants or providers like that, that definitely changes the landscape. So it's not lost on me that sometimes finding the right fit is still incredibly challenging in our community. And I don't think that's probably not completely unique to Downingtown at this point. I think that's probably pretty widespread, sadly.
Mhm.
Definitely. And I'm always beating this drum, but please see this school as a resource and an ally. I think that so often we parents really are reluctant to go to the school district to disclose something negative that's going on with our child, because we want the school to see our child in a positive light. I want you to write their letter of recommendation. I want you to believe they're a good person. They are a good person. They're just struggling. And I think that at least I've worked with so many educators who say this, like, we want to help. This isn't about being punitive. It's really about support. And you do have so much access to resources just to know the calls to make, at least, that most of us aren't equipped for, you know. There was another great question that came in ahead of time. What recommendations do you have for parents with kids who have ADD and need help with assignments, hygiene, daily tasks?
Well, I guess the first thing would be, have you gotten them into therapy? Have they seen someone? And this is an opinion, but it's anecdotal, but it's also true in some regard. There's a big difference between ADD, ADHD, PTSD. They all kind of look the same. The behavioral stuff is the same. And sometimes it's a developmental phase, right? Sometimes I know tons of people that are diagnosed ADD. They are just kinetic people, and they need to do things that are very active because that's how their nervous systems work. And there's nothing wrong with them. That is actually the trickier part with these different types of divergent thinkers or beings, is they don't do well in traditional learning environments. So I guess the first question is, diagnostically, what is going on? Also, sometimes people can present with ADD, but they have something emotionally going on in their life, or they have some traumatic stuff, and it's just showing up as this. So really trying to figure out what is the origin of it is most helpful to figure out a direction to go in.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, I'm sure this person is not alone. I struggle with giving in to late nights and video games. What can I do to set school as a priority again? And the social norms are so at play here, aren't they? I mean, everybody, right? The belief is that everybody's doing this.
Well, I think that you answered your own question in the question, which is, I struggle with setting a boundary. The implicit thing in the question is, I struggle emotionally with being the bad guy. If you're a parent, you have to be sometimes. So that's where I would suggest go figure out what's going on with you emotionally so you can be the best parent and boundary setter that you can be.
And
Kids,
I think that sorry, Lex, I didn't realize you were pausing.
No, I had
talking.
no, it's okay. One thing, kids learn how to manipulate their parents at age 3 or earlier. Completely. They understand how you work and they figure you out. So just remember that. I'm done.
Yeah, I think the thing that is like the essence of this whole conversation, though, with boundaries too, is that, would you say, I guess is my question, like, we just should expect, like, you have to expect that at sometimes your kids are gonna be like, you're the worst. I don't really like you very much.
Of
like,
course.
and like, we just have to go in expecting that, and expecting that, like, a big part of parenting is, as we're learning tonight, managing our own emotions, but also expect that our kids are just going to puke their emotions all over us all the time. Like, that's just kind of how this works. So, and it's just like, we have to decide how we're going to manage it and respond to them. And that's where that self-work piece comes in. But even in this instance, it's like, it's okay to be the bad guy. That's part of it. And it's figuring out, okay, where is my boundary? Where is my line? And having that consistency and saying,
Mhm.
okay, I'm hard line at 10:30 every night, whatever it is, all screens have to go off, and expect that your child is going to be probably real not happy about that. And you just have to hold that hard line. And it'll be tough, but it's something that will benefit everybody, because it will go back to what your family's values are around screen time and valuing sleep and school, and it all falls into place. But just
Mhm.
kind of, I think it's almost better to have this expectation of like, oh wow, so it's like not just my kids, like everybody's kids, this is like what's happening in our homes.
Yes.
Is like, just we have to do these things, but it's for the greater good. And we're going to have to be a little uncomfortable, because our kids are going to come at us, because they're going to be uncomfortable because they're not getting to do the thing that they wanted to do, but it's for their own good in the end.
Mhm.
That's all I'd say.
Chrissy, you reminded me of another therapist I know who works with adolescents and says we have to get comfortable with seeing our kids be uncomfortable.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. Uh-huh. It's the
Yeah.
theme. It's like the lesson of everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, for my third grade daughter, how can I differentiate the truth versus her stretching the truth or making up stories?
In third grade, it's developmentally normative to make stuff up. Your job as an adult is to kind of know what's going on and assume that they're going to be stretching the truth. And then ask them questions to kind of figure out what's going on. And I think you can do it. But it's not a sign of a moral failure if a child's like lying to you. Sometimes it's a sign of extreme creativity, depending on how elaborate it is. I always love elaborate lies. I'm like, this is amazing. You should write books. So I guess the question more is, what are they lying about? Or are you just saying, or is the person asking the questions saying they are unsure of what's happening? When in doubt, try to ask questions to discern what's going on.
And I guess there might be some patterns to be wary of. Like if it's always about, no, it wasn't me. Like if it was about something they, like if they're in trouble for something and they're like, that's not, I didn't break that
Mhm.
glass or what, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
If it's that's one kind of storytelling, right? Versus some big dramatic story about something that happened at school or on the playground or whatever that you're questioning, right? There are different ways of not being completely honest.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'd assume they're fibbing a little bit.
right. I like what your friend and mine, Mr. Patrick Dowling, says is trust our kids to be kids.
Yes. Yep.
That's what kids sometimes can do. Okay. So we have a couple of questions about 20-year-old. There are two questions about a 20-year-old. So one is, I get numerous FaceTime calls from my 20-year-old. I need advice on how I can set boundaries to be there for them with limits. I can think of some parents who would love to hear from their 20-year-old more than they do. But obviously this is a concern that this parent has.
So this is also a kind of a developmental question. We want to look at it through that lens. So at 20, I assume they're in college or they're away somewhere. It's good to have a close relationship with your kid, but they also kind of need to expand their database of connection in the world to figure out their life. So I think one way is to just bring it up. Say, hey, I love talking to you, but it's kind of important for you to grow these types of relationships in your life. And So not because I want to talk to you less, because I love talking to you, but we're going to be talking a little less. Okay. And it's for this reason. The other question you want to ask is to your kid, who else do you rely on? Who else do you trust in this world? You know, because if they're constantly coming to you, it kind of tells you something. So the bigger concern is like, what's going on in your life where you have an over-reliance upon me? But it also could be situational. Maybe the person's going through a really tough time and they need to talk to their parents. I don't know. That's the nuance part of it. But in the case of the question asker, if you think it's too much, be honest. Go back to the principle. Just be honest. Say whatever you want. That's from your heart and real. Like, I love receiving these calls, but it's also a little overwhelming. You can have like a bunch of different emotions at the same time. It's totally cool.
For sure.
Mhm.
How is it 8:30? Oh my God, this has blown. If I can please squeeze in one more, and I shared a comment with everyone because the attendees aren't able to share with other attendees. So I anonymously shared that. But here's one that is my 13-year-old son is only one of their friends that does not have an iPhone. I am cool with it. Thoughts? Am I too strict? I'm a high school teacher of 23 years and think that iPhones are causing more harm than good. If he wants one, he can earn money and pay for one someday. It's about a 13-year-old, only one of his
Yep.
friends that doesn't have one.
Well, it's kind of two things. That's like an interesting question. On one hand, I think that's really cool to give your kid the opportunity to work to purchase something that has meaning, because the phone will have more meaning if they earn it. I guess the only thing I would suggest is giving them, because they're 13, so it's kind of hard to get a job at 13, but give them the opportunity to earn the money for an iPhone. Everyone does have one or something. So society's happening all the time. The question is, what do they do with the phone? Just because you have one doesn't mean it's going to be negative. That's where the way that you are and the parenting that you do and the boundaries you have on the phone comes into play. But I do think it's easy if you are in an environment that you've been in for 23 years to see a lot of wild stuff and to increase fear in your heart, for it to be like, whoa, those are bad. iPhones are just iPhones. It's just like drugs. They're just drugs. It's the people that use them that have the issues. So we have to think about that. And maybe your child is going to be pretty responsible with it. I don't know. So I would say it's good to set a boundary, but give the person an opportunity, give your kid an opportunity to earn it. So boundary with a solution or a path.
Thank you, Lex.
I unfortunately have to leave.
I totally got it. So if you have to jump off.
This has been wonderful.
It has been, but I want to make sure
Thank
that I
you.
ask Chrissy and Beth
Well-
Ann to talk about your resources. Lex, thank you.
Thank you so much,
having
everyone.
you.
It was nice to see you.
Stick with us, folks. We're going to follow up on a couple of things.
Bye.
Thanks, Lex. Okay, so if you guys can tell us about
Yeah.
your podcast and your groups and your everything that you have
Yeah.
going on.
Chrissy, I'm going to ask Chrissy to do that. And Kim, thanks so much for sharing. When you see all of the resources that are available to parents through, be a part of the conversation, whether it's in-person groups, virtual groups, the amazing topics. I mean, it's just, as you're just such a like a sort of a like one stop, shop, and we're really grateful to you and to keep sharing that. And we are happy to keep promoting that too, because as Chrissy and I find out, it's folks, parents are so excited when they find resources like that are available without charge, where they can have a conversation like with someone like Lex and just have this amazing, sharing with each other and how valuable that is. So Chrissy, if you would just give a quick shout out to some of the things that are happening right now for parents in the next couple months.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So I put a link in the chat, but I don't think it went to everyone because I can't choose that for some reason. So I don't know if Kim, you can cut and paste it. So the main things that would actually relate to this program tonight, which was so great, I have so many notes, is we are running kind of similar to this. It's interesting because a lot of the things we talked about tonight did resonate and come up very similarly, both to our parent-to-parent podcast and our parent-to-parent peer support group. So we do have a bi-weekly podcast. There's some great episodes that relate to these topics. We have one about self-regulation, big feelings, boundaries. So if you're looking for other content about this, I'll add that as well in the chat after I stop talking in a second, because it's hard to multitask. So that's our parent-to-parent podcast. If you search it, you'll be able to find it in any app that you listen to podcasts in. And then also we have our parent-to-parent peer support group. So we have 5 different sites running monthly group meetings, and these have different themes each month. So this month, for the month of March, our theme is building resiliency, which was kind of interwoven into this conversation tonight too. So we actually just had our elementary daytime group meeting today. I went to that this morning, and it was just such a great, you get to meet other parents and talk about what you're experiencing in your home, give each other different tips, and kind of like, I did this and I've done this before with my kids and this works really well, or this is a challenge I'm having. What do you think? But it also is facilitated by a very expertised facilitator. So we have an expert on hand to help kind of guide the conversation and also provide some professional insight and tips and things. So those are happening. That is the link that's posted in the chat. So those are happening there's a nighttime and a daytime group for elementary age parents, a group for the 6th grade center parents, a group for the middle school parents, and then one group for high school parents. So they're all in person. So I encourage you to check that out to see the different topics that we have coming up for March and April. And May, or March, April, and May. So they'll be running monthly. And then we also have our resource page on our CTC website that you can look at that has tons of links to everything, all different topics, both behavioral health, mental health, and drug and alcohol related as well. So there's a lot of things that live on the internet from our website that you can find. But most of our parent focused stuff is under that parent to parent tab that has everything listed there.
And it is open to all parents in the Downingtown, all families in the Downingtown community, not only families who have children in the Downingtown Area School District. So if you wanted to share that with families that have children that perhaps are homeschooled or non-public school setting, it is open to all of our families in Downingtown, all those resources.
You guys are amazing. Sarah, anything that you would like to add? Downingtown, let me tell you, you guys are lucky. You've got a lot of good people that have your back. Go ahead, Sarah.
We do. We're very fortunate in that regard. I actually was just trying to remember, and Beth Ann and Chrissy might remember this actually. I feel like a Path to Hope might be hosting a community resouse fair at Lineville Middle School.
Excellent.
Yes.
Is that this
March
month?
25th. I'm going to pull my phone out.
I think it is March 25th.
See, now shame on me, the gift of social media. I'm looking to find it right now.
I have it.
It is actually
Yes,
March
It
25th.
is. So a Path to Hope, March 25th, Lineville Middle School. And that's an amazing opportunity to just see all of the community resources right there where you can talk with folks and also just get some more information about how to navigate lots of things that we talked about tonight. Sarah, that's a great shout out. That's great.
Yeah. Hope that was okay, but it just occurred to me. I was like,
Yeah,
that is
that's
coming
awesome.
up, and certainly in our community. So for
Yep.
our parents,
It's perfect.
be a good one to know. Yeah, that's it.
Well, thank you all so much. Thanks for being here to our attendees and panelists. You're amazing. Thank you so much for everything that you do.
Thank you.
Thanks,
all right,
Kim.
guys. And I
Thanks,
put all the
everyone. Have a good
infos in the
evening.
chat. Yeah, please take our survey when that pops up when you're finishing up, everybody. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.